hopefully, cool. So if there's anything else that you want to know, gives you all a bit of food for thought. And feel free to put more questions in. At the moment, chat. We haven't planned. We are recording it, so you can December for later.
No drinks.
Or drinks, yes, localized drinks. What I've been doing in the last 18 months is we have been contemplating how to get Melbourne to perform better. Session at some point. Third Tuesday's the 20th. How to get Joomla to perform optimally. So you probably won't do an online one. So Joomla, I found those that are interstate. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Quite often in January. If I run Lighthouse or GT metrics on a WordPress site that hasn't been optimized, those in Victoria scores somewhere in the range of 30 to 50 quite often. Something out of the box next year, I think we'll with the new site, if it doesn't have large graphics. Terry's been suggesting it for a while. I'll typically get a score without optimizing it between 60 and 80. Then there may be some lunchtime once I optimize it. The goal is to get it in that final 10%, 90 those country folk like you, Martin, and come in more often than not. We're moving home pages to get up towards 80 to 90 percentile, and the rest of the site will typically be a 90 to 100%. Oh, I had a client that just depends on how caught up with the design. Arbory, which is next to if you happen to have a station. And so it's nice I was able to catch a train in, get off. And if you happen to have least I could do slideshow that's got Bangkok, was in town for 1920 by 1080 images on it that are JPEGs or even if they're WebP images, so you could meet halfway. And they've not been and yeah, the opportunity to meet him, you'll still end up with a score. Probably not going to work out. He's 18 months. That plan is that he's relocating to basically. He's going to go through how it's done in a Joomla 3 site tonight, which is fine. Collins, console.org.au. Yeah, there's more work. But the first one I'm about to share and show is actually the a Joomla 4 site that I've done. All right. So
that was really informative.
It was. It's very good.
Really good. I mean, I've worked with you, and I'm very aware of a lot of what you talked about. But to see it all kind of pulled together,
there's not too much on the page for refreshing
in more of a flow that we could progressively use as a checkpoint is invaluable. Yeah.
Good.
So thank you.
Thank you.
So
thanks, Patrick. It's good.
Not much to this show. When you edit the video, ideally is run it past me before you upload it, because this page here has a lot of lazy realised that you can grab my JCH move key. The homepage without JCH turned on for mobile.
You memorised it, did you?
Scores 86.
I think you didn't get. I think
if you haven't used Lighthouse before,
I know the field's quite large.
Displays 4 scores, and there's an optional 5th one that I use because it relates to progressive web applications. Ideally, you want to have 100 across the board.
I'll stop you spending a couple of hours.
Typically, your SEO is easy to get to 100 if you've got a. You still need the last 6 on a meta description on a 32 page title character hash. They're the main things that are used for.
That's not worth it.
Best practices can fluctuate a little bit, but if you follow the instructions, another 25,000 combinations, list of recommendations, it'll then
Christmas 23
more about what should be there. Cool. All right, well, thank you. That particular note there is in relation to Colin's quite happy things to do with what we're talking about. He now knows what he's been paying me for HTTP headers earlier. So there's different things.
You know he's happy, or he's just assuming?
I know you can best practices. One that comes up is
on the face. I must be happy.
A note about Joomla having the wrong, or sorry, having a. So recently on jQuery version, so Consa have just merged all of their state entities into. It's actually a false positive. Essentially managed national. And so in the last couple of months, the project version number didn't change. So set up OS membership 1.12 and then getting all of the it's on the correct version of the one, but it's not process. Going to clear that flag, so you get a score change. I had a slight. I've got the hiccup by doing a trick with installing Easy jQuery as a component. And Easy jQuery lets you. So what do you have? 200 upgrade your jQuery version, which is now I think up around or 280 on the national list.
And that lets 280 originals and And I'd noted
the problem with the later version
transfer
gets rid of
across.
the best practice score. So you're at accessibility members, you can quite often get to 100 fairly easily. Gone through and signed up on, but depends on what type of things you've got with your navigation is usually the problem that I find. Not a bad strike rate. So in this it's regard, trickling in still brand logo, whatever this particular link one is. Today, one yesterday, not got a specific name, and what 39 probably is.
We've got an AGM coming up, and some of them, I gather, are thinking that if they don't sign up, they won't be a member for the AGM.
It's hidden there. So if you don't have a name, depends on how exciting your AGM is, doesn't it?
Oh, well, it's riveting from a contents nurse's perspective.
It'll throw an error there. So, and then the final having an AGM score, which is one we'll just focus on for the rest of for Joomla presentation tonight. Is to do with performance. The paperwork went to Linux Australia last night as possible, but it'll give you various. We're waiting for them to come back with and go through that. What else we may need to do, but news, I think it's good news. From quite often, you can't really do much about your initial server response time,
So nothing came
unless
out of the
you
meeting
change
you
servers.
turned up to?
I had a shocker last Wednesday, so
Thank you.
sorry, got home and didn't make it. Stuart, you didn't make it. So that cool. No. So that one's quite often going to stay as a score breaker, depending on what you've got. Fortnight. But anything less than a second, Clinton has is probably an acceptable time there.
I could have done. I was just telling you it wasn't
unused
convenient.
JavaScript. You can only do so much here. Right. Well, thanks everybody. And recapture for the forms on the site. We'll see you. You're effectively loading an external piece of JavaScript there.
Thanks a lot, Patrick.
The other ones that you'll quite often see that you can't do much about.
Thank you, folks.
Include Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, Facebook Pixel, and so they're all loading from an external source, and it's up to them how they decide to distribute it. So it's sometimes not as small as it could be, and it's not as you can't as easily reduce the size of that. It's getting picky on this one, that it's trying to reduce the amount of CSS a little bit more. But the big one that can save you a lot of space and points is serving images in the next gen format. So at the moment, the banner image is a JPEG, and that could be converted into a WebP image when it gets served, and that would reduce the resource size down and increase the score. So with JCH optimized turned off on this site, it scores an 86. With it turned on, this site scores a 99. So we'll go into more of that, but you can now see that those other reasons disappeared. And when I ran it, the response time was a little bit higher, but it also is probably likely that that's within the range there. The other check that I tend to run on sites is to use GT metrics, which then combines the Lighthouse score with a Y-slow score and a couple of other metrics that it builds the score with. If you create a free account, you can change your testing to use Sydney.
And here they are, right by the front door.
Use Sydney rather than Vancouver. And this site's actually scoring 100 by 100. So that's Joomla 4 site. And now we'll go to the Consa site, which is a Joomla 3 site. It has a slideshow there with 5 slides that then have various things that it does. And it's desktop. So the other thing that Lighthouse does is it can test as desktop and it can test as mobile. So the desktop version scores at the moment 87 with JCH off. And you can see I've got the other 3 factors to 100. So that's quite good out of the box. Mobile is a different matter. And mobile scores 38 out of the box. So I need to do a bit more homework for Colin to see what the impact of that can actually be. But this score's with the JCH turned off, and so we'll see what happens in a minute. GT metrics, as a result of it being turned off, scores a 75 and a C grade, and 89% on the structure. So then I've turned around and made JC Optimize go back on, and then run those reports again. And the mobile jumped back up to 93, but the best practices had an issue there because it stretches the image. So there's some little things that I can play around with. With JCH, when I've turned it on and off, and it's a later version, it's reset a few things tonight. So when I turn it on to desktop, it's jumped to 100. But you can see here from the preview that all the images have temporarily disappeared. So if I was to run that again now, we might find that comes up with a different score. But GT metrics has jumped up to 99 and 96%. So overall, the site is actually functioning better. And I've done something else to recache it since I ran the test at the start.
Patrick, can you say something about what JCH actually does to your site? Yeah.
So I'm about to walk through all of the different parts there. Effectively, what it does is take all of the different caching and compression and optimization factors, and then you can turn them on and off as you see fit to get everything crunched down. And there's about 20 things that we'll probably cover. If anyone wants to take a list and send it to me while I go through it, that'll save me having to watch it back and transcribe this. We'll start a walkthrough. I'll just check what, so they still come up with 100 there, still 99 there. Yeah. So, all right. So, go there. So once you install it, so I've got the Pro version installed. There's a few things that the free version doesn't do in relation to optimizing images and a couple of other things. So if you were using the free version, you'll see that they're blocked out when you go to options. Out of the box, you can turn on enable combined files. So the way that Joomla loads things for JavaScript and CSS is that by default in Joomla 3, it would put it all into the head of the document of your template. And so you'd have your meta descriptions and title and shortcut icons, but then you'll have a whole heap of JavaScript load and a whole heap of CSS files that will load at the top of the page. So if you view your source, I'll show you that. So let's turn that off. So you can see here that so all of these parts here are CSS files, and then there's a whole heap of custom CSS that loads on the page. Lots and lots of that actually. And then all of these lines here are the different JavaScript files that are loading on the page. So each of those has, every time you've got a new item being linked, that's another request from the server. So it has to go and load more things and request more things. And every time you load something on older servers and older browsers, HTTP requests used to be limited, that you would send it and would ask for a file and would be able to send back 2 at a time. And that was quite slow. So you wouldn't get the third file until the first or second file had downloaded, and then it would send another request. There's a new protocol called HTTP2, which if your server's got that, it then pushes more data and speeds things up. So that's part of one of the things that this does. But enabling the combined files. So if I do that again now and refresh So one of the things it does is minify all the CSS. But here it's preloading 3 CSS files, and then it's identified that that needs to be at the top. It's merged a bunch of other CSS, taken all the white space out, so the page has got a smaller load time. And then at the bottom of the page, all of the JavaScript has now been moved to the bottom of the page. So by loading the JavaScript last, it means that all of the content of the page will actually load first. And some of how you need to tweak it is so that you don't get a momentary flash of content there. So where you could see the navigation buttons when I refreshed it there, and then the images load, you could go back in and just tweak things and take out exceptions to make it so that it loads that all in one go. With the automatic settings, you've got minimum, intermediate, average, deluxe, and premium. When you hover over those, it shows you what it does. So that's only combining the CSS and JavaScript. The next one also minifies the CSS and JavaScript. So that's taking out all the white space and shrinking everything down. It also gzips the JavaScript and the CSS. So that means that the files are actually compressed when they get served out. So they take less space in there. And the minify HTML is where you could see that the view source had been compressed. The average one adds in that it includes third-party files. So if it can find a file that it can include in the compression and the combination factor, it will do that. Deluxe also does a whole lot of things to, so if you use add imports for CSS, it will include those. It'll also crunch the in-page styles and then includes external files. So you can see it's building on how much it does. Premium almost does everything except for deferring the async and JavaScript. So that the deferral part is where it tells the JavaScript when it loads to load later. And so that increases the performance of the page loading, but it doesn't load the JavaScript until it needs it. And then the Optimum one does everything, including the deferral. Typically, I use the Optimum one and then make some other modifications. But before we go into the modifications, I'll run through the other things that it does here. So all of these ones at the bottom can then further modify what happens with the Optimum, but adding image attributes means that it's if you've just dropped an image into the content, this will work out the height and the width and fix that up. And in fact, sometimes I've got that off, and I'll turn that off at the moment because I think that'll fix one of the other problems that I had with the logo not being right in one of the views there. If you've got lots of tiny graphics on your site, then the sprite generator will merge all of those images into a combined single graphic and then convert it into CSS that then says this class for this sprite image means that you just take this 20 by 20 pixels part of that bigger sprite image and then loads that. So I typically don't have lots of tiny images on sites. I'm either using Font Awesome or other SVG icons. So typically I'll leave that one off. If your web server is capable of a HTTP2 push, then turn that on, and that will then speed up the amount of files that get distributed at any point in time. Turning on lazy load of images means that when you've got lots of images on the page and they're below the fold, the load time, instead of including those images don't get requested until the page scrolls. And so the lazy load automatically gets appended throughout the site to improve all of how many images you've got loading. Optimize the CSS delivery is tied into the various things that are up the top. And that's whether you can go through and change various options in here to say, okay, these particular CSS classes or this particular CSS file is what's used to make the stuff look like it should at the top of the site. So don't optimize those particular pieces, optimize everything else, and then you can load it that more efficiently. This optimized CSS tries to automatically put the particular CSS that should be at the top so that it doesn't break the rest of the site. So if you have a custom CSS file and you've got what's called CSS render blocking parts throughout your CSS file, then when it optimizes the file, it groups all of those and puts it at the top so it's the first to load. If you're using Google Fonts, this uses a different method to load the Google Fonts, putting the command at the right part of the file. And the LCP stands for, I think, longest content paint. Checking that. Largest contentful paint. So LCP is the time from when the user initiates loading the page until the largest image or text block is rendered within the viewport. So if your page is starting to load and it has to load the Google Fonts and then it has to render the page, then that's going to slow down the site. So it'll move the Google Fonts to the end. If you're using Cloudflare, you can tell JCH to configure it to use the CDN so that you can distribute the cached files more easily. All of my sites tend to only service Australia or particular cities, so I don't tend to use that. Smart Combine lets it break down because of the HTTP2 being able to serve out more files faster. Smart Combine lets you break the combined CSS and combined JavaScript into multiple files, so then it'll load, instead of trying to load a megabyte, it might load 5 times 200 kilobytes in parallel. So the 1 megabyte file would take, say, 5 seconds, but 5 200 kilobyte files will load concurrently in 1 second, and that would be faster. And the final part that it does is page caching. So you can turn on page cache. If you turn on page cache in JCH, my recommendation is to not use the Joomla page cache. They tend to do a bit of conflicting because it'll render the Joomla page cache and then it'll try and cache that page using JCH. So I tend to turn this one on and don't really use the other one along the way. These advanced features, I think 2 of them are only, first 2 are pro features anyway. You can try and reduce unused CSS, so that'll, if you happen to have pages that are using lots of, if your style sheet happens to have lots of styling to it, so a lot of the U-theme stuff has all of the UI kit loading at once, reducing the unused CSS will take out the parts that it detects the page isn't using and then load that in from there. Similarly, it'll do the same with JavaScript. I tend to leave the JavaScript off because the libraries tend to not be necessarily as broken down. Also, console side doesn't use a lot of extra JavaScript. And then the DOM size is relating to loading of the HTML block elements below the fold. So reducing the DOM means that it's part of how it defers the page from loading there. In the utility tasks, if you happen to need to clean your cache, you can click the clean cache button and that'll wipe out everything that is in the cache. I also use Regular Labs Cache Cleaner, which puts the button down on the toolbar. You shouldn't need to do these parts that often, but generating a new cache key will cause it to invalidate everything. Let's see what that says if I can get that to hold. Okay, so there's server caching and there's browser caching. And browser caching is more likely to hold a version of the file if all the other rules are in place. So generating a new cache key and flushing the cache then regenerates everything, and that would force, so when you load the page, it's looking at which resources it's already loaded. Changing the cache key changes the URL for the resources, and so that will force it to get a new copy of the page. So you need to, if you want to make sure that you're getting a fresh copy of everything, if you've made a major change, clear the cache and generate a new cache key, and that will push a whole new copy there. Ordering the plugin, the JCH plugin needs to be one of the last system plugins that fires, because it basically needs everything else to be rendered and then takes the rendered output and then does the compression to it. So that pushes it to the end. Optimizing the HT access is not fraught with danger. What this will do is it will append a certain block of code to your HT access file, and that's fine. But it will do it in a way that means that your admin tools will always need to regenerate the HT access file. And so while we're on that point, I'll show you quickly here that, no, I can share this. So when you go into the HT access maker, all of the things that are in the JCH Optimize are in the admin tools one, except for this block of information here, which I'll just read out. So what this does is that it sets the expire caching for the browser. And so this is something that doesn't get included by default with everything else that admin tools does. And effectively it deflates the files and then sends them in one of the rule sets in Lighthouse or GT metrics, it advises you to use browser caching to reduce resource requests. And effectively what that is doing is saying, okay, when I get a file from the server, tell me what to keep as a cached copy or tell me what to ignore and download again. Adding this set in adds in CSS and JavaScript and XML files and font files, and a couple others. And there's actually, I haven't updated this particular one, but there's another file that, there's another file type that I found the other week that I need to add into my list. But effectively, by dropping this block of code in, which I'll share, we'll come back to that's the code. No, it seems I can't paste that at the moment. So if anyone wants to, I'll share it later. Effectively, that does what the JCH one is doing, along with all the other parts that the admin tools one does, and then gives you the points for that particular technique. Before I mean, Robert, what's your question?
So I was going to ask that rule that you got. Did you get that by optimizing HT access in an environment and then copying and pasting what it produced?
Yes. So I compared the two and eliminated what went through what admin tools version had and went through what the JCH version did, and crossed off the things in the JCH one that admin tools was already doing, and ended up with that subset at the end. Wow. And that got loaded there. So yeah. And when that's been added, I know that it's less sometimes that it adds points to the score, and more that it eliminates a particular piece of advice from the best practice list or something like that. So, so without that, you get something that specifically says leverage browser caching as a piece of recommendation. Putting that code in does the recommendation there. And the extra line that I can't recall exactly what was needed a couple of weeks ago, it's something to do with WebP images. So adding that line then cached all the WebP images, which then meant that you had all of the images loaded once and then were cached, as opposed to it trying to load the WebP images over and over again. So, yeah. All right, so that's all of the basics out of the box covered. There are, I'll come into the options in a second, but the other thing that JCH does if you've got a pro license is that it can convert all of your images to WebP. So if we go into here, if I go into images, so the logo's been optimized, but the others haven't. And so basically you can click on check all, and that'll do a, leave it out there. You can, just go on those two. Click optimize images, and it'll load them to this third-party service that JCH uses, and then tell you how much space you saved. So, so this PNG file was optimized as a JPEG. What's that now? So the first thing it does will be to reduce it down in size in the format that it is. So it saved possibly there 20% as the size of the PNG file, and then it will convert it to a WebP file, and it can potentially convert it automatically to save another 60% of the file space. And so you can end up with somewhere between a 50 and 80% file size saving if you had already been conscious of how well you optimize the image. Now, I know that I'm very acutely aware of speed and performance and image size and how it impacts page loading, things like that. I have a number of customers who have a print background and think that resolution is directly tied to file size. And so they will, there's one site at the moment where there's an image that's displayed at 300 by 300 pixels, but it's actually a 3000 by 3000 pixel image that's 40 megabytes in size. So if you have that type of thing, then the other parts of the optimization process to do it manually to get it to a point where it's the right size and the right format, that 40 meg image, I'm expecting to get down to about 60 kilobytes in size for the final version when it's fixed. And suddenly they'll find that their score goes through the roof on that particular page. It's a typo 3 site, so I can't just install this and run that. So yeah. So there's effectively JCH will automatically do your home page, but it doesn't automatically do all the images for other pages. With the Tiny House Transport site, I've actually now got into the habit of exporting the photos that I'm uploading to the site as a WebP image when I create the image, as opposed to having to then go and do a step to optimize the images. But by having all the images optimized, that'll mean that it's ready to deploy the optimized images. So if it's blue and italic, it means it's being converted, and then you can go and delete either the backup images that it's kept a copy of, or restore the images if you aren't happy with the quality of it. So WebP effectively does a similar thing for JPEG compression. And so the tighter that you squeeze, the more chance there are to get artifacts in place. And so you need to be happy with the trade-off between performance and appearance. There's a couple of sites that I've been worked on with Brit where the file size that I would have been happy with and the artifacting that I was happy with wasn't as the clarity wasn't there to what Brit was happy with. So the advice to the client was, on your homepage, you want it to look this way and look spectacular. We can only get the score as a result to this point because of these technical considerations. And they accepted that. But I think at that stage, the site had gone from 55 to 79 or something on the homepage. So it was already an improvement there. So now we'll go to options. Actually, I'll go back. So the page cache gives you a list of the pages that have been stored and whether they're device specific, which I'll show you that setting in a second. And so if you've got page cache on, you can come in here and delete a specific page that's been cached, and then it'll recache it from there. Okay, so we've got the basic settings at the top. You can debug the plugin, which you shouldn't need to do that often. That'll add more details to the Joomla debug. Never had to use it. If you are on a site where you are making changes and you're logging into the front end of the site, you can set it so that it's disabled for logged in users. And that would mean that it stops applying the cache while you're working on the site. If you were to do that for a site that has a membership, then all of the advantages of the caching would go out the window if the users are logged in. So I typically leave that turned off. But then there's some pages where you don't want, for various reasons, for it to cache the page, because then it might cache user information. RS Forms has a known issue where if you've got the form embedded in the page, then having Joomla caching on means that the form and the last result on the form gets cached, and you'll have a problem. The recommendation is to make the menu item point directly to the form and then do other things. But what I found with a couple of sites we've done, that to get the form embedded and looking nice in UTheme with a whole heap of other related information as a precursor to the form, it's easier to just embed the form. And if you're just using the Joomla cache, it caches everything. And so the solution there was to turn off the Joomla caching and then in JCH come and exclude the specific URL so that then that form page wasn't going to be cached. It would just load normal. So you can pick menu selections or you can exclude particular URLs. On this site, all of the membership area URLs are excluded because that's all to do with the logging in, the user profile, and the membership sign up. So they're all active forms. With the combination of JSS and JavaScript. So, I mean, most of these settings, based on sort of if you've picked optimal, all of the settings will be set to whatever the optimal collection is. When you come in here, quite often you're just fine-tuning whether you want something to do something because it's not quite working out. So most of the settings that you're going to see here are going to be the optimal ones that work. The way to tell if it's not working is that you'll get a scrambled web page. So at the moment, the current released versions 4.3.1 or 7.3.1. That has a bug in it, and I've got this actually has the 7.3.1.2 in it at the moment, which fixes the bug. And so there's a new version of JCH due in the next couple of days. So here's where you turn on and off, whether it's combining the CSS and JavaScript files, smart combining, how long it caches for. If you're not making lots of changes to the site, you can blow that out from 15 minutes to 12 hours. And that means that it won't have to regenerate the page that often. Deleting expired cache keeps your server file system cleaner because it then will get rid of things that are there. In an early version, it used to just accumulate all of the cache files. And so you could end up with a busy site having lots and lots of files there. How much you minify is how much you compress the HTML. At the ultra level, it's taking out HTML comments, it's removing all the white space, it's removing redundant attributes. And so sometimes you can find that if you have it set to ultra, it might remove something that are less, not lower quality, but a less consistently written plugin might balk at and cause a problem. So that's one area to tweak. How you deliver the combined files. The default there is usually fine that it uses the URL rewrite with htaccess. Note that with that, if you accidentally butcher your htaccess file, i.e. delete it, or sometimes if you update your PHP version and your cPanel is not configured ideally, then suddenly you might only end up with the details for the PHP version in your htaccess file and nothing else, and that will effectively brick that feature. And so you won't, if you've got JCH turned on, you'll end up with nothing on the screen and errors everywhere. So if you end up with JavaScript errors in the console, the try catch then gets added to prevent errors from one file affecting the combined file. So that's a fairly technical one. Leaving that as yes means that it just adds a layer of bulletproofing to that. And then combining the files automatic settings. So the gzip files is good to do because that compresses everything, minifying it, takes everything out. So do that. By default, include all extensions. If you say no, there's another spot to do that in. And then ideally, you're including all PHP and external resource files that need to load as well. If you find that you're having problems, then this would be another area to go and just check through. Similarly, on both CSS and JavaScript, the first set of settings are the combine, the minify, replacing imports, and including in-page CSS style. So if you've got style that are loaded as part of your template or part of your content, this setting picks those up and will actually put them into the compressed cache file and take them out of the HTML. So when I first viewed the source with the JCH off, this particular template has a big slab of inline CSS, and so that would then take that out and then move that around. So yeah. Here you can exclude CSS files that you want to load separately. So if you're really getting to the point of being nuanced, you could take all of the CSS that renders above the fold, put that in a particular file, and have that ignored from the combine tool, and then that would then render that CSS separately. You can filter out particular CSS files. So if you want to remove something that you know is not being loaded, then you can exclude that. And then you can further optimize the CSS to limit to how many elements per file, reduce the unused CSS, and then that will deliver it faster. And the same goes with the JavaScript, that you can reduce it, exclude it, and there's a bit more filtering here. You can actually exclude particular JavaScript files and loading, but also particular extensions. So if you've got an extension that seems to be playing up when compression's on, you can come in here and then say, okay, well, I don't want the CSS for Joomla Shack slides to be included, and that would exclude that from the cache loading. Over time, I've had to include them, then work out the troubleshooting, then come back after I've troubleshooted it, and then try it again, and find that the reason that it wasn't firing properly was actually the ordering of the plugin or something like that. So there's various parts to it that go up and down as to how you do it. It takes time to finalize it, and then go from there. So I'll just quickly answer Robert's question there. So with the Joomla cache, so I've got conservative caching on and platform-specific caching turned on. And then in plugins, the page cache is turned off and the JCA optimized page cache is turned on because of the settings that we're using. So. So again, with the page cache turned on, you can say how long you want to keep the page for. So if we say change that to 12 hours, because the pages aren't being used that often, or sorry, aren't being changed that often, that works out well. Platform specific means that it's going to put out a mobile version and a desktop version as separate views of the file, and optimize those differently. Excluding form users. So if they're using a form, it's going to stop caching for users until the cache expires. The way that I set up the RS forms negates this because it's excluded from the earlier settings here with the exclude menu items. But you can also exclude other URLs specifically if you need to from doing a page cache. And in this case, I've excluded COM OS membership because that's basically a form-driven component that can be messed up if it does cache there. And then these other settings are just generic system ones as to whether it's using the file system or the global setting, and reducing that HTTP requests and then that setting there is if you click on the mode and switch between development and production, then it's also going to clear the page cache when that happens. So media, I don't tend to set a lot in here at the top. With the add image attributes, it can be a bit problematic if you haven't got all your images specifically at the size they're supposed to be displayed at. It can cause things to warp slightly and be messed up a little bit. The sprite generator I mentioned earlier, I leave off because it ends up being a stack of things, and I don't have enough stuff to make that sort of a bit of a value add there. Lazy loading, I set all of this to yes and haven't ignored anything here. And then what lazy loading does is it adds a lazy load tag to all the images, and actually we can do so the home banners there, I've just added that back in. So that's these images here at the moment load the. So initially they were loading, waiting for the page to finish loading, whereas now if I refresh it, they should load straight away with it. Hard to tell. It's got. Sometimes hard to see the lazy load, especially when things are cached. But what should happen is that when you scroll the page, the images are then requested and then load, and that reduces the overall load time for the page. So lazy loading audio and video files and background images really means that that also improves it. A lazy load added to an image tag is easily done in the course of the context of the page. But quite often with background images, they're loaded with a CSS style, and the CSS style then is harder to load with a lazy load tag. So this takes care of that part there. Most of the rest of this I'd leave as the default. So HTTP2 preload covers whether it's pushing the resources out concurrently more efficiently. Optimizing fonts pushes things out more efficiently. If you're using a CDN like Cloudflare, you set that up in here, and then that will let you point. So I've got pseudo CDN set up. They haven't quite worked out as well as we could have had. So the CDN is disabled at the moment. But effectively, you can say, okay, well, I want to load these file types from CDN1, these file types from CDN2, these file types from CDN3, and then it'll balance out the loading. Optimized images determines whether you're going to use WebP images, which are the optimized images. The first part's whether it's using the API to optimize the images, then whether you're using lossless or lossy. Lossless doesn't give you as much compression there. And then whether you save the metadata on the images, which can give you another marginal few kilobytes, or probably less than a few kilobytes, of space being saved when you optimize the images. Currently, it only auto resizes the homepage, like the main menu images. And then if you're using that optimize image tool, it'll then recurse it in subfolders and go from there. This feature is still a beta with reducing the DOM size. You can see whether yes or no. It's one of those troubleshooting features again. So what that will do is comment out things that are off the page, and then as it scrolls into view, it uncomments the layout and puts it back in. So if you find that stuff when you scroll still doesn't appear, it could be this part, and so turning that off would fix that up. And then obviously we've got permissions there. So turning all of those things on, for most of you, installing JCH, turning on Optimum, turning on a few options down the bottom here is likely to give you the first bounce in your score for Lighthouse. And then after that, then you really need to go in and look at the report and say, okay, well, what do I need to do to get the next piece of scoring down, and analyze all of this. And this is the part that takes lots of time and understanding as to what each line turns out to mean. I'm quite happy to shoot people message back if you've got a question on what does this mean. A lot of it, I'm not going to explain the ones that are there at the moment because I know that it's then turned on in the report here to get it down further. But the few things that are left on this list, I can probably go and look at and say, okay, well, let's do it again. And even the few changes I've made while I'm presenting it there are likely to fix up the next level of things. So, yeah. All right, before I move on to the next part, any other questions, anything that anybody's not quite sure on there? Or?
I just add, Patrick, am I muted?
No.
Good. Just add, I use JCH Optimize, and I've had problems with it when I've done updates, when I've done Joomla updates or updated other, not like definitely from 3 to 4, but also point upgrades, and also upgrading Joomla JCH Optimize. Sometimes I've had issues with it.
So he's had problems with the Joomla updater.
Yeah. And
then worked out what that was, but the fix came in the next version of it. So I think from about 7.2, it's been a little bit more consistent, and 7.25 to 7.31 should have upgraded without an issue as the most.
what I found is it's the combined files, and so one of the fixes he told me at one stage was to go into where it says enable combined files there, is to disable it and then re-enable it again, and that often fixes the problem just there and then.
Yeah.
But again, for the main Joomla 4 update, I'll have JCH optimize off, do everything I need to do, and then put it in. Clear.
Yeah. I mean, there's been some quirky little things that I've found over time, and some of it is rapidly deployed CSS tweaks where in the custom CSS, I haven't gone through and said, okay, this is the CSS for the header, the body, the footer. I've just dropped in things to fix things as I've done them, and it's not optimal in a way that cascades down the page like CSS is designed to do. And so there's been a few times where troubleshooting it, I've then gone back to what the code was and gone, that probably could be 3 styles above where it is now, because something else was cancelling something out or it inherited something from somewhere else, and that'll fix that up. So it's only as good as how well coded what the rest of your template's doing is going to be as to how it works out. But I've certainly seen sites that have consistently now score 90 plus on all their pages after just spending a half an hour going through and just tweaking a few of the settings there to get it going. So it's certainly well worth the effort. I'm actually about to interview Samuel Marshall, who's the guy that has written JCH for Joomla magazine. So
good.
There's a few other insights I'm hoping that he shares with me, because he's also made a version of this for WordPress. If you happen to be a WordPress user, you can effectively use the same caching. I mean, I don't know if anyone's used some of the other WordPress caching tools. If nothing else, they're going to send you an ad to say, buy the upgrade, because that's how WordPress components seem to run. And then from there, it's sometimes it's probably trying to do too many things. Whereas I've tended to find this is really sort of doing most of the optimization there. So that said, Admin Tools HT Access Maker does a whole heap of other things for security, but some of the things in here are for performance as well. So let's see a little bit. So without going into too much detail on all these ones, all of the basic security items I tend to now set to yes, and that is a whole heap of basic security protections.
The block access from user agents is a good one.
Yeah. So all of these are effectively, they're search robots as a generic category, but they're not necessarily good search robots.
It's disabled by default as well.
Yeah. And so I think the only one that I've ever taken out, Yandex used to be. Yeah, there's one called Yandex that used to be listed in here, but it's not in. I know it's still there. So that was the only one that I sort of revisited at one point, but I've left in there.
You're after Russian customers, mate.
Right, that would have been what it left me to leave it in there then.
Yeah, Yandex is the major Russian search engine. So
okay, right.
If you're hoping to get some sales over there,
then take that one out. All right. So
sometimes I'm not sure if it still does, but wget might be blocked, and sometimes you might be wanting to use something that uses that.
As a PHP command?
Like from a command line kind of thing. Yeah.
Back end and front end protection, give various generic protections to stop things happening to your site. Like with a well-configured, properly configured admin tools, since I started using admin tools and paying attention to how it's configured, I've, touch wood, not had a Joomla site go down that has admin tools on it. Most of the defaults are all fine. It sort of, you know, blocks where you can block certain folders you can access. So file type exceptions are allowed in these particular folders. You know, so that they're saying you can use CSS and JavaScript files that are in a template folder, obviously, but same for components, modules, images, and plugins are the other folders that have things that need to be actioned and rendered for the front end. So then what types of files can be added in or accessed in that, and the case sensitive versions of those. Yeah, it turns on different things. You know, if you go through, again, if you've got questions on any of them, look at the Akiba site first or reach out and ask a question. The exceptions here are particular. So they've actually whitelisted access to the various parts of the Joomla updater and Akiba backup restore process. A good tip here, the default, I'm not sure what the default show. I typically add in the folder for the template into here.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it doesn't always render out or it blocks certain things. And the other one is that particular one's for using my sites as a monitoring tool. And so that allows pathways through to for them to be able to access it. And that's been heavily tested between Akiba and my sites there.
Patrick,
yep.
just one, if you go back up, that I've found that I still have to do, in your allow direct access except PHP files.
Yep.
If you're using the image editing features in the JCE editor,
Okay.
you need to add the temp directory in here. Because basically JCE creates temporary versions of the files by you cropping them or resizing them. Yeah.
So just like that?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Good. That's my gain for the night. Working out something there. So these rules here, so this section here lets you either put something at the top of the htaccess file or at the bottom of the htaccess file. This particular block here is tied into the sudo cdn that I'd set up, and that's all commented out at the moment. The next part's the JCH optimized part for the deflation, which is sitting there. And I've recently added something else on. There's another block that I had to add for another site the other day, and I can't recall exactly what it did, but it's doing something specific, hopefully for one particular site. If I've done it for someone that's in the call, pipe up, but I can't remember what it was. This part does some of the caching things. So the first one forces it to load index.php before index.html. If that's not quite how it's configured on your server, that if you happen to have an index.html file and an index.php file, and it was the other way around, and it happened to be in your root directory, then or in your public HTML directory, then Joomla wouldn't load. The index.html would load if this was set to no, and your server was set the other way there. So I'll come back to that question, Robert, because that's a doozy.
Complicated question.
Yeah. 1 year for all static media. You got some other options there, but the long expiration means that you get better caching. compression and gzip are all parts of the improving how the site delivers. Redirecting an index PHP to the site's root just takes the index PHP off if someone types that in. You can redirect non-www to www, or the other way around, or don't worry about it and end up in two sites. That was because of the CDN, so typically I put it to non to www. If you are redirecting an old site to a new site, then you can put the redirection in there and it'll do a blanket URL change. You can force HTTPS for specific URLs, though further up there was a setting. There is a setting somewhere. Oh, sorry, no. In the in your global settings would be the better place to force a HTTPS redirect. But if you do that, need to have specific ones, you can put them in here if you weren't using HTTPS. You should use HTTPS for both security and performance. And this HSTS header only works if you're HTTPS. So I recommend turning that on. HTTP strict transport security. So it's a policy that helps with protecting it from certain types of attacks. Some of these other ones do other things to do with attacks. This cross-origin resource sharing, leave to the default, but that's tied into what we were talking about earlier with the HTTP headers. It would be the add-on there. Character set helps with preventing some things that can be done nastily with that. I use the server default for the E tag. And this is probably the one thing that I tend to change. I think it defaults to same origin or empty, but the one that I've found works best is strict origin when cross origin. What the referrer policy is, if you're loading something from another site or sometimes you'll end up with a console error saying that the cookie isn't allowed because of some origin issue. So strict origin when cross origin helps to rectify that. And it means that if you're embedding a YouTube player, then the YouTube cookie needs to be strictly from YouTube when you're trying to display it on your site.
That's actually the default in the Joomla plugin. So if you're using that on its own.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it might. I'm not sure if I haven't installed Akiba admin tools out of the box.
Click on it again. I can probably tell you. I've seen it enough recently.
No. So I'm not sure what the default there.
If you click on the drop down again, I can tell you. I've seen it a couple of times. It's no referrer when downgrade, I think.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found strict origin when cross origin works best there. And then the last part's there. It's going to cause me a headache in a second. Following symlinks, most cases, leaving that as the default should be fine. And then the base directory, if your website's installed in a subfolder that's not the root of the hosting, then you need to change that, which is tied into the default htaccess. So then,
with a / on the end, important.
Yeah. So because of the changes I just made, it just kicked me out there. Yeah. But the last change they made there now are forcing it to be www instead of not the www there. So, yeah. All right. So then another thing to do with the scores is the SEO scores. And Robert's very familiar with this from the last couple of days. So to check my metadata is up to scratch on sites, I use OS Meta Pro, and then you can look at whether you've got empty meta descriptions. So looking at this, I'll need to come back to Colin with some tips on what needs to be done there. So the 3 most recent articles Colin's added to the website don't happen to have metadata, which is fine. Don't stress, Colin. The 403 and 404 pages doesn't need a meta description. But what this tool does is lets you see all of the metadata, all the meta description for all the pages on your site. And so then you can go in and instantly update. And then when you save it, it saves it back to the article. So then you don't have to reconnect. Robert, did you work out whether SH404 Seth had been saving it back to the article?
No, look, I don't think it's doing that, but I always enter it in the article anyway. So I've been pretty diligent about entering it in the article. Yeah. But I don't know, and after discovering the issue today, say the OG graph and OG tags and the Twitter cards, is I don't know exactly where it's getting it from the menu. I'm assuming the menu options page or the catalog page, category page, a blog. I'm assuming it's getting it from the menu. And again, I'm pretty diligent in putting my meta descriptions in there. Yeah. But what was interesting is the search engine title. So the item title was there because I did install a free version of this, and the item title was there, but the search engine title wasn't. So
right, okay. So it must be the.
So I guess it's picking it up, but exactly where it saves the search engine title, I'm not sure.
Yeah. And again, this is where I'm not. I don't know which features the Pro doesn't have, or sorry, which features the Pro has that the free version doesn't have.
One it doesn't have, and this was a little annoying, is that the free version uses a demo, and the demo says I'll download free version, and then they show you adding search engine titles to menu items. Well, that's not available. Menu items is not available on the free option. You've got to buy the Pro option to get it.
Yeah.
It's fair enough, but
well, there's certainly some value add. But
yeah.
It's certainly easier to go through.
For sure.
So I use another program called Screaming Frog, which does a. I'm not sure. I might come back and show that if anybody's interested.
Patrick, does OS Meta have the option to specify a social media image or open graph image?
No. So OS Meta's only really doing these.
Yeah. Okay.
The title and the description.
However, you can buy Shack Open Graph.
So I'll show that in a moment as well.
I just use a plugin that does both.
So the rule of thumb, just to finish this part off, is that a search engine title should be under 70 characters and a meta description under 155 characters looks to be the latest recommendation there. And so the counters here show you how long they are. I've had some sites where, because you can actually auto-generate, so copy item title to search engine title, and I think generate descriptions when you're in the articles, will then go and grab from the content what the page is about. It doesn't necessarily do that in a I don't think it's classed as using AI. I think it's classed as using, grab the first 120 or 180 characters or something like that.
It's not what you'd call an optimized abstract.
No, it's more fill it in so that there's one there. Yeah. But yeah, if you've, like to a degree, this is all set and forget unless you then are going to go to the next level of trying to keyword optimize and milk every piece of traffic out of your site. So,
Nathan, I'll just say to you that the other plugin I looked at today, which I bought, which only does articles and doesn't do the menus, that's all it does is, it only does the Open Graph and the Twitter card stuff. And that developer has another extension which kind of does this one.
What's that one called, Robert?
It's OCH.
Open Graph?
I'll plug it through. I'll send it through to you.
It's called OCH, Open Graph.
OCH.
Yeah, it's online communities.
That's them. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I actually use the Open Graph one.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Good. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with that. But
how do you get around the? Oh, let's talk about it offline. But it's how you get around the page and menu. They have come back to me. I haven't read the answer yet. So.
There are some options. I thought that's what you were talking about earlier.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I've got Shack Open Graph prior on there. I've used a couple of others in the past. You've probably got the advantage, Robert, of having shareable content, or you've got a desire for your content to be shared to other platforms.
What kind of sites are you doing, Patrick?
Well, this is, Colin, you can probably attest to you for me that the Continence Nurses Society of Australia is a very limited audience. It's not a mainstream audience. Is that a fair statement, Colin?
That'd be pretty fair. So it's a group of, 150, 200 nurses who specialise in problems of bowels and bladders. So it's not going to be a mainstream website by any stretch of the imagination.
Probably not strong on the social media sharing then, Colin.
Yeah, no, there's no barbecue conversation tips or anything on the website.
Not too many images and things like that. But
no, fair enough.
That's in the members area.
Oh dear. So what I found with this plugin, it has the basics, but it doesn't necessarily have optimized processes in place for a couple of things. I did make some feedback suggestions to them 2 years ago, and the result of the feedback was, we see you're on GitHub. You should be able to program them in. Here's access to the repository. And I didn't have time to go back and do it, nor I don't think I had enough skills to go back and say it, but or to code it.
Nor the inclination to improve their product for them.
Yes, without significant remuneration there. It works fine in that it puts OG and Twitter card and whatever else in, but the particular issue we had was that if you've got a blog category layout and you load the page, it's trying to share the first image of the blog. First image, which is the first blog post, as the piece of data, as opposed to the category blog image, which if you're on the blog category page and you're trying to share, then you really want to share the blog, not the post. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's little quirks to it. In the last couple of months, Joomla Summer of Code, one of the projects was a SEF package. So there's a new component that should be coming in 4.3, which from what I briefly looked at it, I have to go back and see what all the documentation says about it. It natively puts the options for Open Graph into Joomla 4 without a need for a third-party plugin.
Yay.
so that also means that you can then contribute improvements through GitHub into the core and see what that does. But yeah, I haven't.
Might be a boo from the developers of Shack Open Graph and OCH Open Graph. Right.
Yes, yeah. 4.3 may not be that far off.
No.
I haven't.
Pretty rapid releases, haven't they? For
Yeah, I've had a work triggered hiatus from volunteering lately. Joomla has just converted to using a new chat platform called Mattermost, and so I've made the mistake of signing into that. That started flashing earlier tonight down here. Yeah, that's now going to see a reset of all the communications, which will be interesting. So now what else did I? All right, so the last, so I think that's covered most of the optimization stuff that I was going to run through tonight. This last part here is the thing that Robert was being perplexed by, I think, with his SEO. So this is a plugin called Direct Alias. So if you want to unmute and throw me questions as you go, Robert, because then I can explain with a case.
Okay, so again, the issue that I had was the hierarchy, and that I had a category and then a subcategory, and in SH404 Ceph, I was able to say ignore the topmost category.
Yep.
And so when I put the use the modern URLs in, it's got the topmost category in it, and so I wanted to have a way of getting it to ignore that from the URL.
Yep.
But I couldn't do it. At least I couldn't work out how to do it, and I didn't think that. I thought that from my reading, from the stuff that I saw with this particular application, that it could extension couldn't do it that way.
Yeah, you can to a degree. So let me see what this one did. Sorry, I'm just trying to find one that's got the.
So about introductions and purpose, mine would be just, it would have introduction and purpose, wouldn't have the about. Cool.
Right. So the about set on this side, the about set to be direct and not inherited. Mm-hmm. And then the sub items there are relative and inherited. So
are you telling me I just wasted all my time doing those redirects?
No. So what I've done with this one, so the committee is / committee. So if using your example, so it could be /about /committee, but by taking out the so direct took the alias out of the next layer of URLs.
Right. So that's your extension there.
Yeah. So that's what the direct alias plugin does. Yep. This isn't the best example of it, but effectively what it does is let you say, okay, at this sub menu, so you usually apply it to the parent menu item.
Yeah.
And then you say don't inherit and make it a direct one. And then that then forces the rest of them to drop that part of the URL out.
Okay. Well, that would be effectively what that's saying, the topmost category, isn't it?
Yeah. So So that's assuming that you've got a menu item that is that top category.
Yes.
So so if you try those two, then that'll clear that out. To answer your other question on redirects, yes, you could put them into admin tools. Putting the 301 redirects into the before or after section will work, but you need to manually know what your syntax is and do it all. It will respond faster. But if you've got ones that are temporary and then once Google picks them up, they're not going to be doing much more, then I use the components redirects component.
Yeah,
the URL redirect section of admin tools. Do you use that?
No, I haven't actually. So
it's actually much better at handling URLs with parameters.
Right.
It's got a redirects in there.
So the URL redirection section, it's better at dealing with so if you go new, you get an option to strip the parameters or otherwise.
Oh wow, okay. Yep.
Oh dear hell.
So if you have a redirect where you want to keep the query parameters, so it might be like a form, and you want to pass those parameters through, it will hang on to them.
Yep.
I'm just going to put an example in the chat for you of what I've. So this is a redirect out of the .htaccess on the Joomla 4 site.
I just found versus the core, it handled URLs that weren't just sort of standard.
Yeah, I found with the core, you had to be explicit for every article.
Yeah. And
so if you can see what I put in the chat there, I was able to find out, thanks to good old Google, some rules for covering. Rewrite it where it comes in as children's fiction, which would be the old URL. Rewrite that as fiction/children in the new version.
Right. So in regards to using regex, which is what you use that one.
Regular, good.
That regular expressions.
Yes.
Putting that into the htaccess file.
Yes.
Would be more efficient because there's no regex in the other two.
Okay, that's great. Well, I've gone through. It worked out well because it meant I had to check every URL to make sure it was going to work, and it was a bit lengthy, but there we go.
Yeah. Now the system redirect plugin you can set so that it collects URLs. So if you're confident that the site's matured and all of the faulty URLs have disappeared, you can disable that and it will stop collecting.
All right.
But if you've got it enabled, then all of your 404s that aren't being picked up by other rules will show up as an unpublished URL in the redirect listing, and then you can go and manually add the rest of them. So
that's good, because that's kind of what our SH404 will do as well.
Yeah, it's one of the features. Yeah. So this is one of the other parts of SH404 Ceph that I was able to cross off the list of features that I used it for, and just use the core.
That's great. Thanks, man.
Is the admin tools one collect URLs, Nathan, to your knowledge?
No, it does not, Patrick.
Right. Okay. So
it could use both though in terms of one to collect.
The other good thing with this is that you can actually put in terms to, so if you don't want to collect any WP admin URLs, you can just put in WP admin, but that'll only do WP admin. But if you turn on regex and put in .star bracket, so that's now going to collect and ignore any URL that contains WP admin.
Okay.
Those are the regex. And then there's, you can work out the different tools to go through and create that sublist there.
That's great. Thanks.
Depending on how closely you're monitoring it. But last two sites, so I've just turned it off here, and I turned it off on the tiny house one when I spotted it 2 days ago. And after spotting it on joomla.org.au, I turned it off when I found that there was several thousand that had accumulated there.
Yeah, that's the one thing I had about the system redirect, is that if you don't pay attention to it on a large site, it can just rack up the database table.
It does, yeah. I'm going to suggest so you could, if you've got the collect URLs option turned off, you can go in and click here and it'll go straight into the settings. But if you've turned that back on, then it doesn't let you go back into the screen.
You got to remember to do it.
Go back to plugins and then turn it back in here. And so I'm going to contribute a little piece of code when I get around to it to have that switch back on there so that you can do both.
Is that 2 years' time, Patrick?
No, but it'll be a Joomla 4 only thing, because they're not making this sort of change in Joomla 3 anymore. So,
okay. That's
cool.
great.
All right. So I think that's all the things that I was going to show off.
That's great, Patrick. Thank you.
It's even dark in Queensland. Oh, no, sorry, it should be dark.
It's bright now. Brit's back.
I hope that's shed some light on
Nighttime here.
getting your points up on all of that. But
very interesting.
It's certainly not a, we've spent the better part of 2 hours tonight discussing it. So from working with Brit and a couple of others that have been watching tonight, Brit's well aware that it's not a 2-hour process. It's lots of to and fro. There's a whole other set of sessions that we could do on using Google Search Console and what all of the problems that you can encounter there are. We might wait until next year for that one. Google started an update of Google Search Console in August, and it's still not fully completed. But the Google Search Console interface is quite clunky in that you can't, it will detect something, but you can't go and tell it to stop. Not only have you fixed it, but you don't want it to go back and check that and actually force it to remove it. You have to wait for it to go back. And I think at the moment,
the request removal tool is back.
Well, no, so the removal request is there and you can do all of that. But the problem we've got 2 sites of Brits that are, this must be coming up to 2 months now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is, because 2 months since I've been in Queensland. So that Google has gone to start testing, and when it does a test of a particular issue and you haven't fixed all of the issue, it finds an instance that fails and then it stops the rest of the test instead of finishing the list, because it assumes that you've got one wrong. That means you've got all of them wrong. So one of the examples there is that there's one site that's got a dozen 404 errors, and all of the 404 errors have been fixed except for one, and that one has now since been fixed, but Google's now going to come back and seed back in. So I can't see how something that's so robotic is still so slow in coming back for people that are actively interacting with the tool. That said, another thing's still taken 2 months, and I finally tried ringing Google today, and we'll be following up with someone higher up to say you really need to get some better processes in place. So